The sound of a lock jamming against my own key still echoes in my mind. Imagine coming home after years of working yourself to the bone, only to find strangers' cars filling your driveway, music shaking the walls, and laughter spilling out from inside. Imagine your own mother answering the door with a look that tells you you don't belong. Imagine your sister, drink in hand, smirking as she tells you there's no room left in your house and you should sleep in your car. That's what happened to me. And that night, standing in the cold outside the lake house I bought with my sweat in sacrifice, I realized something terrifying. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the first ones to lock you out. What would you have done in my place? Walk away? Call the cops? Or fight back? I want to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below, share this story, and subscribe if you believe family loyalty should never mean blind sacrifice. The night air at Lake Tahoe was sharp against my skin as I rolled my suitcase up the gravel path toward the house I thought was mine alone. I had pictured this moment all week, quiet waters glimmering under the stars, a fire warming the stone hearth, a chance to finally breathe. But the reality that greeted me was chaos. The driveway was crowded with pickup trucks and sedans I didn't recognize. The bass of some party song rattled the window panes. I froze, my grip tightening on the handle of my bag as though it could anchor me in the storm already rising in my chest. I pulled out my key, slid it into the lock, and twisted hard. It refused to turn. I tried again, jiggling, forcing, whispering to myself that maybe the mechanism was just stuck from the cold. But deep down, I knew. Someone had blocked me out. Someone inside my own house. I pounded on the door, heart thudding in sync with the music. The laughter inside didn't falter. It took 3 more strikes before the door cracked open. My mother stood there, framed by warm light and the hum of voices behind her. She looked at me the way you look at an unwelcome guest who arrived too soon. And then my sister Chloe appeared beside her, eyes glittering with smug delight, raising her beer like a toast. "Sorry, sis," she said, voice sweet as venom. "Every bed's taken. Guess you'll have to sleep in your car." Before I could reply, the door shut with the final slam that told me everything I needed to know. My family had decided the lake house wasn't mine anymore. I used to think hard work was just a phrase people threw around when they wanted to sound noble. Then I lived it. At 19, I was bussing tables at a diner on Colfax Avenue in Denver, scrubbing dishes until my hands cracked open under the hot water. I would finish a 10-hour shift smelling of grease and burnt coffee, then drag myself back to a 1-bedroom apartment I shared with 2 roommates who barely tolerated me. While they slept, I sat hunched over a flickering secondhand laptop, teaching myself lines of code until the sun bled through the blinds. Every click of the keys was a prayer that someday I could trade exhaustion for dignity. Most nights I fought to stay awake by chewing ice or drinking stale diner coffee I had poured into a paper cup. I told myself the pain was temporary, that each hour I forced into the night was a brick laid toward a future no one could take away from me. I remember staring into the cracked mirror above the sink, my eyes red, my hair tied back with a rubber band, whispering that I could not quit. The world already thought I would. My family certainly did. They assumed I would stay in low-wage jobs, just another girl who never made it out. But I clung to my textbooks from community college, highlighting every page until the words blurred together. I learned algorithms with the radio humming faintly in the background and sirens wailing outside, reminders of the neighborhood I wanted so badly to leave. Sometimes my stomach growled so loud it startled me because dinner had been nothing more than instant noodles. But I convinced myself that hunger was fuel. Each sacrifice was proof that I was moving forward, even when no one else believed it. There were nights when the weight of it all almost broke me. Nights when the code refused to compile and my head dropped onto the keyboard. I woke up with letters imprinted on my cheek and a fresh wave of despair rolling over me. But then I would see the balance in my bank account. Every dollar scraped together, every expense denied. I reminded myself that if I kept going, one day I would not be at the mercy of anyone. I would not have to beg or borrow. I would not owe gratitude for crumbs. I would be free. That dream was the only reason I kept dragging myself through 12-hour days and sleepless nights. And little by little, things began to change. My first real programming job did not pay much, but it felt like winning the lottery. I bought a used car that did not break down every other week. I moved into an apartment that did not smell of mildew, a place where I could breathe without shame. Each paycheck gave me a taste of security, of power I had never known. I stopped counting every coin before stepping into the grocery store. I stopped pretending I was not humiliated when my clothes hung in tatters. When I signed the papers for my first condo in Denver, I cried in the parking lot, clutching the keys like they were the crown jewels. But even that did not compare to the day I set foot in the lake house. It was small, just 2 bedrooms and a wide porch facing the water, but the moment I walked through the door, I felt something click into place. For the first time in my life, I could breathe without waiting for the other shoe to drop. I could look out at the water sparkling in the Nevada sun and know that I had built this sanctuary with my own hands. Every mile I had walked, every hour I had worked, every night I had gone hungry had led me here. And in that silence, broken only by the wind moving through the pines, I finally understood what it meant to win. It started small, the way these things always do. My brother Derek called me one Thursday night while I was still at the office, my eyes burning from staring at lines of code. He cleared his throat and said his landlord was threatening eviction again. He was short on rent, just a couple hundred. He'd promised it would be the last time. I sighed, opened my banking app, and transferred the money before he even finished talking. He thanked me in a flat voice, like someone receiving change at a cash register. I told myself it was fine, that family steps in when family stumbles. A week later, Chloe showed up outside my condo. Her old car had broken down on the highway. She leaned against the wall, mascara streaked from fake tears, asking if I could cover the repair. She knew the name of the shop, the exact bill, like she had rehearsed it. I wrote the check anyway. She hugged me, but it was a limp, perfunctory gesture, her eyes already drifting to her phone. Then my mother Linda brought over a stack of envelopes, utility bills and late notices, her hands trembling as though the paper itself were heavy. She told me she did not know how they would get through the summer heat with the power company threatening to shut everything off. My father Frank sat in his recliner behind her, nodding in silence, his eyes fixed on the television like this was all routine. I wrote another check, slid it across the table, and listened as she exhaled relief without ever saying thank you. I told myself this was what success was for. I earned more than they did, and that made me the safety net. But the calls kept coming. Derek again, saying work had cut his hours. Chloe again, saying she needed to make her car insurance payment or lose her license. My phone buzzed constantly with messages that all began the same way. Hey sis, I hate to ask, but... Each time I felt my stomach knot, and each time I gave in, watching the numbers in my account slip lower. One night, I sat alone at my kitchen counter, scrolling through my statements. More than $2,500 gone every month. Rent for Derek, repairs for Chloe, utilities for my parents, groceries for all of them. I added it up with a shaking hand and realized I was sending away nearly half my paycheck just to keep them afloat. I had built a life from nothing, but my own family was draining me dry, and none of them seemed to notice or care. The worst part was the silence that followed. No calls to check on me, no messages asking how my projects were going, only demands, only crises, only open hands waiting for me to fill them. I stared at the glow of my phone screen that night and felt something shift inside me. I was not a daughter or a sister to them anymore. I was a wallet with a pulse, and the weight of that truth pressed down harder than any debt I had ever carried. Sunday dinners used to feel like a tradition, something grounding, but lately they felt more like trials. I remember walking into my parents' house that evening with a small burst of pride. I had finally bought myself something after years of denying every whim. A simple black handbag I picked up on sale at a department store. $49. Not leather, not designer, just new. I placed it on the chair beside me as we gathered around the dining table. Chloe was the first to notice. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as a smirk curled across her lips. "Must be nice," she said, dragging out the words, "while some of us are worried about keeping the lights on." Her fork clinked against her plate as if the sound itself punctuated the accusation. I froze, the fork in my own hand hovering midair. Before I could answer, Derek chimed in, shoveling mashed potatoes into his mouth between words. "I'm living on ramen again this week because they cut my hours. Meanwhile, Rachel's buying herself fashion statements." He didn't even look at me. He just dropped the words on the table like trash tossed to the floor, expecting me to bend down and pick them up. I forced myself to speak, my voice barely steady. "It's just a bag. The first new one I've had in years." The words came out small, like they belonged to someone else. The silence that followed should have been enough, but my mother couldn't help herself. She set down her glass and looked at me with that practiced blend of sympathy and reproach. "You've been blessed with opportunities we never had," she said gently. "Sharing more shouldn't be so hard for you." I felt my face burn as I stared at the tablecloth, tracing the faded patterns with my eyes just to keep from crying. My father sat at the end of the table, chewing slowly, nodding as though what she said was gospel. No one looked at me as a daughter, a sister, a person who had bled for every dollar she earned. They saw only a bank account with legs. The meal dragged on with forced conversation, but I barely heard it. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat echoing the same thought. I had sacrificed years, starved, fought, and clawed my way out of nothing, and still it was never enough. The bag sat quietly beside me, a symbol not of indulgence, but of the invisible line I had crossed in their eyes. By the time dessert was served, I could barely breathe. Their laughter sounded hollow, their words sharp, even when they weren't aimed at me. That night, walking out with the handbag clutched against my side, I realized something had changed forever. I was no longer one of them. I was the villain in their story, and no amount of giving would ever make me anything else. I thought maybe if they saw it with their own eyes, they would finally understand what all those years of sacrifice had built. So one weekend, I invited my family to the lake house. I drove ahead of them, my chest tight with both nerves and pride. The water shimmered as the sun slid across it, and the house stood tall against the pines, a place that felt like proof I had made it. When their car pulled up, I braced myself, hoping for even a sliver of joy on their faces. My father was the first to step inside. He ran his calloused hand along the stone fireplace, whistling low. "This is something else," he said, his eyes brighter than I had seen them in years. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe he was proud. My mother drifted to the porch, her voice soft as she stared out at the lake. "I could sit here all day," she murmured, almost to herself, as if the view belonged to her. I smiled, swallowing the unease that crept in. Then Chloe pushed past me, dragging her suitcase across the hardwood as though she had already claimed the place. "This'll do," she said, dropping it in the guest room without asking. The thud of her bag against the floor made me flinch. Derek, meanwhile, headed straight for the kitchen. He swung open the French door, his voice casual, almost bored. "You got beer in here?" He didn't even glance at me as he rummaged through shelves I had stocked with food for myself. I tried to steady my breathing, to convince myself it was nothing, just them being them. I led them through the rooms, pointing out the details I had chosen so carefully, the wooden beams, the wide windows, the study upstairs where I could finally work in peace. They nodded, smiled faintly, but their eyes told me they were measuring it not as a gift of mine, but as something that might be theirs too. Before they left that Sunday, I stood by the door with a single spare key in my hand. I hesitated, my palms sweating, alarms ringing in the back of my mind, but then I pressed it into my mother's hand. "Just call before you come," I said softly. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and tucked it into her purse, as if it had always been hers. That night, after the taillights disappeared down the gravel road, I walked the halls of the house alone. The air felt heavier, like something had shifted. I wanted so badly for them to see this place as my sanctuary, the reward for years of grinding. But the way they had looked around, the way Chloe dropped her bag like she owned the floor beneath it, the way my father's eyes lingered as if he were already settling in, none of it felt right. I curled up on the couch, staring at the dark water through the window, trying to quiet the voice inside me, whispering that I had just made a mistake I would regret. I had been buried in deadlines for weeks, pushing myself through endless nights in front of my computer screen, and when the project was finally done, I decided I deserved a break. I packed a bag, threw it in the back of my car, and drove straight to the lake house without telling anyone. I remember pulling up the gravel road with my windows down, ready for silence, ready for air that didn't reek of city smog. But the moment I opened the front door, my stomach dropped. The smell hit first. Beer, cigarettes, and something rotten that clung to the walls. My shoes stuck slightly to the wooden floor, sticky from some liquid that had dried into a film. I flicked on the lights, and the scene unraveled before me. Pizza boxes towered on the counter, greasy lids half open with stale crusts inside. Empty bottles lined the windowsills, the fireplace, even the staircase, like trophies left behind by strangers. My sanctuary looked like a frat house that had been abandoned mid-party. I walked deeper in, my chest pounding, snapping photos with my phone as if documenting a crime scene. The guest room looked as if a storm had ripped through it. Blankets crumpled, sheets smeared with stains I didn't want to name. The bathroom was worse. Towels soaked and piled on the floor, toothpaste splattered across the mirror, clumps of hair clogging the sink. Every step I took only confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't careless mess, this was destruction. By the time I reached the porch, I was shaking so hard I had to brace myself against the railing. Cigarette burns scarred the wooden posts I had sanded myself. The smell of smoke lingered in the cushions of the chairs I had picked out with care. I pressed my phone to my ear and called Chloe. My voice trembled, but my words were sharp. I asked her what the hell had happened. On the other end, she sighed, like I was being dramatic. "I had some friends over. It's your house, right? You can clean it." I froze. My grip tightened on the phone until my knuckles turned white. I reminded her of the stains, the burns, the garbage stacked high. She laughed, light and dismissively, and said, "You're making a big deal out of nothing. Hire a cleaner. You can afford it." When I confronted the rest of them that weekend, Derek leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, nodding like Chloe had delivered gospel. "She's right," he added. "You've got money. Stop acting like it's the end of the world." My mother avoided my eyes, but murmured in agreement, and my father just shrugged as though this was nothing more than wear and tear. My hands trembled as I laid the photos down on the table, forcing them to look. "I want the key back," I said. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. My mother finally reached into her purse, pulled out the key, and dropped it into my palm without a word. I left their house with my jaw clenched, the metal cold in my hand, and for the first time since I had bought the lake house, I felt utterly alone in it. Not because no one else cared about it, but because the people I trusted most had shown me just how little they cared about me. Months passed before I had the courage to drive back to the lake house. Work had drained me, and I longed for the quiet of the water and the steady hush of the trees. I packed my bags with groceries and books, already imagining a weekend of stillness. But as soon as I turned down the gravel road, my heart sank. The driveway was jammed with cars. Music thundered so loud I could feel the bass in my chest. Every window glowed with light. My lake house, the one I had bought to escape the noise, was pulsing like a nightclub. I parked at the edge of the road, gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened. My key jingled in my hand as I marched to the front door, hope fighting with dread. I shoved the key into the lock, twisted, and felt resistance. The mechanism refused to turn. I tried again, harder this time, until I realized the truth. Someone had left another key inside the lock, blocking mine. My breath caught in my throat. I banged on the door, 3 sharp knocks that rattled the frame. It swung open to reveal my mother, her face lit by the golden glow of the party behind her. She blinked at me with surprise, but not shame. "We made a copy," she said simply, as if announcing the weather. Behind her, voices rose, glasses clinked, and laughter spilled through the hall. I stood frozen, my suitcase at my side, the smell of grilled meat and beer drifting out into the night air. Before I could respond, Chloe appeared at her shoulder, sipping from a red plastic cup, her smile syrupy sweet. "Sorry, sis," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Every bed's taken. You'll have to sleep in your car." Her eyes glimmered with a cruelty I had never wanted to see, but always suspected was there. I tried to push past them, but both of them stepped forward, hands firm against the door. With a single motion, they slammed it shut, the lock clicking into place. I stood there, the music pounding behind the walls, the echo of their laughter filling the darkness outside. My bags felt heavier than ever, and my chest hollowed as I realized I had been locked out of my own home again. I stepped back from the porch, staring at the glowing windows. To everyone inside, it was a celebration. To me, it was proof. Proof that I had given them too much power, and they had taken the last piece of me I thought was safe. I drove back to Denver that night with tears drying on my face and fury burning in my chest. The steering wheel shook under my grip, every mile stretching out like a lifetime. By the time I pulled into my apartment garage, my decision was already made. I would not give them another cent, not a single inch more of my life. I set my suitcase down and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen lit up the kitchen, and I scrolled through my banking app with trembling fingers. One by one, I canceled the automatic transfers. Derek's rent? Gone. Chloe's car insurance? Gone. My parents' utilities? Gone. Each click felt like snapping a chain that had been wrapped around my neck for years. For the first time in forever, my money would stay mine. I leaned back in my chair, heart racing, almost dizzy from the relief. The next morning, I called a locksmith. His truck pulled into the driveway of the lake house by noon, the words "Miller's Security" painted on the side. I stood on the porch, arms folded, while he worked the locks out of the doors I had once opened so freely. He handed me new brass keys, their edges sharp and clean, and said, "No one's getting in without these." I curled my fist around them, the weight solid, undeniable. But I didn't stop there. That afternoon, I met with a security company. 2 men in dark uniforms walked the perimeter, sketching diagrams and drilling holes for cameras. Motion sensors on the porch, glass break detectors on every window, alarms wired directly to my phone. By the time the sun dropped behind the trees, the house was under watch, a digital fortress. I walked room to room, listening to the hum of the new system, and for once, I felt safe. I stepped onto the porch with a glass of water, watching the lake ripple in the evening light. The same house that had once been invaded now stood silent, its boundaries marked and guarded, the key in my pocket pressed against my leg, a reminder of what I had taken back. I whispered into the dusk, "Never again." The words tasted like steel, sharp and final. I breathed in the pine-scented air, letting the stillness sink deep into my bones. The peace I had longed for was finally mine, and this time, no one could steal it from me. It was a Friday night when my phone buzzed with an alert. I'd been cooking dinner in my Denver apartment, the sizzle of onions filling the room, when the notification from the security app flashed across the screen. Motion detected. Lake house front porch. My chest tightened as I opened the feed. The camera lit up, and there they were, my father and Derek, pacing the deck like prowlers, their heads bent close as they tried to peer through the windows. I watched Derek kneel, pulling a key from his pocket, slipping it into the lock like he owned it. He twisted, jiggled, cursed under his breath. Nothing. He tried again, harder this time, his shoulders shaking with frustration. My father stepped in next, his larger frame blocking the view for a moment, but I could see the same motion. The key turned, refused, stuck. They looked at each other, then banged the door with open palms. The audio picked up muffled voices, angry, impatient. My phone rang. First, my mother's name lit up the screen, then Chloe's, then Derek's. I ignored them all, my eyes glued to the camera. A minute later, the feed shook as Derek grabbed a patio chair and raised it high. My heart dropped. He slammed it against the glass door, once, twice, until the pane shattered into a rain of shards. The sound echoed through the microphone like a gunshot. I stood frozen, the knife still in my hand as I watched them climb through the broken frame into my living room. My fingers finally moved. I dialed 911, my voice clipped and sharp. "This is Rachel Miller. My family is breaking into my house at Lake Tahoe. I'm watching them live on my security cameras. Send officers now." The dispatcher asked if I was safe, and I whispered, "Yes, but they aren't." Minutes later, red and blue lights swept across the gravel driveway. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt, doors flying open. Officers shouted commands, their voices clear even through the speakers. My family stumbled out of the doorway, blinking under the sudden glare, their hands reluctantly raised. Derek tried to protest, but one officer spun him around and cuffed his wrists. My mother's mouth opened and closed, a silent plea. Chloe's mascara streaked as she cried. My father's jaw was tight, fury radiating from his stare. I stood alone in my kitchen miles away, watching them lined up against the railing, wrists bound, faces stunned. My phone buzzed again with their calls, but I let it ring, the sound fading beneath the crackle of police radios. For the first time in years, the house was mine, defended not by my silence, but by steel locks and the law itself. The next morning, I drove to the station, the silence in my car louder than any storm. My phone was filled with missed calls and messages, all begging for mercy, all demanding explanations. When I stepped into the small interview room, they were already there. My mother's hair was tangled, her eyes red, clutching a Caper cup of water as though it could save her. Chloe sat slumped, Makeup streaked across her face, her hands twisting in her lap. Derek glared at me with raw fury, and my father sat stiff, his jaw clenched, radiating defiance. My mother rose to her feet, voice breaking as she reached for me. "Please, Rachel, we're your family. You can't leave us in here." I stepped back, refusing her touch. My voice came out steady, though my hands trembled at my sides. "Family doesn't break into my house and treat me like a wallet." The words hung heavy in the stale air. Derek slammed his palm on the table, his cuffs rattling. "You'll regret this. We just wanted to use the place for a weekend. You act like we're criminals." I met his glare, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "You broke glass to get inside. You forced your way into something you knew wasn't yours. That's exactly what criminals do." For a moment, no one spoke. Even Chloe stopped crying. My father finally broke the silence, leaning forward, his tone sharp and bitter. "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" I felt a laugh rise in my chest, not of humor, but disbelief. "After all I've done for you, this is how you treat me," I whispered. Their eyes shifted, searching for cracks in me, but I didn't bend this time. I turned and walked out, the metal door clanging shut behind me. Outside, the air tasted cleaner. Hours later, I sat on the porch of the lake house, the sun dipping low, golden light dancing across the water. The security system's soft chime reassured me with every beep. I held my book but didn't read. Instead, I listened to the silence, the kind that belonged only to me. I looked out at the horizon and spoke aloud, as if confessing to the wind. Sometimes the bravest thing you can say is no, even to family. The words didn't feel cruel, they felt like freedom. And I want you to remember this. Your worth is not measured by how much you give to those who only take. Protect your boundaries, guard your peace, and never apologize for it. If you have ever felt used, share this story, leave your thoughts below, and subscribe for more voices that remind you to choose yourself when no one else will.